Thank you, Joan. I do tell jokes. And given the seriousness of the message this morning, I think I'll start out with one that recognizes that in 11 days, Lisa and I will celebrate our 34th wedding anniversary. It seems that there was a young man and a young woman separately traveling through Europe in the dead of winter, and they were inadvertently assigned to the same sleeping berth car. And they were too tired to fuss with the arrangements, so they agreed that she would sleep on the bottom berth and he would sleep on the top. They're about 20 minutes into the trip trying to get to sleep, and he reaches down and taps her shoulder and he says, "Ma'am, it's awfully cold up here. Would you mind getting that blanket out of the closet for me?" And she says, "Well, I've got a better idea. Let's pretend for just one night that we're married." He says, "Boy, that'd be great." And she says, "Okay, get your own damn blanket." Okay. Well, good morning again, and it's my pleasure to chat with you for the 6th time as Chancellor about the condition of the university and some of the opportunities and certainly some of the challenges that are ahead. My remarks are set in the context of the most significant economic recession of our time, with continuing uncertainty with respect to when we'll see economic recovery. And as faculty, staff, and students, you are all too familiar with the very real consequences that budget reversions, reductions, and freezes have had on this institution and on our sister institutions in the UNC system. Now, I realize that sacrifice is called for at the top. The Chancellor's operating budget was cut just like everyone else's. And yet we made the difficult decision this year to spend a little money to move ahead with moving the Chancellor's office from the Reese building to the Cato building, to make room for other administrative units that needed space in Reese, and to find permanent suitable homes in the Cone Center for the University Honors Program and the Levine Scholars Program. But I want you to know that no decision comes without adverse consequences. My commuting to the Chancellor's residence has more than doubled. And my parking space is 5 times as far away from the door as it used to be. But more seriously, let me thank all of you again for your shared sacrifices over the past 3 years or so, as we have been bruised and battered by the budget crisis. Pay raises have not occurred in 2 years. They won't occur this year. And barring some kind of miracle, they won't occur next year. All of you were required to take involuntary furloughs, and your costs of living, from health care to parking, continue to rise. If you are sending a child to college in North Carolina, or probably anywhere else, your costs are going up as well there. All of us in the administration know that it's been an enormously difficult time. This is why our focus throughout this crisis has been on the goal of preserving jobs at the university for as many faculty and staff as possible. As difficult as the absence of salary increases might be, losing a job entirely is far worse. So we've been focused on job preservation, and we've largely been successful. So in that setting, I want to talk about 4 topics this morning. I'd like to talk a little bit, as Joan did, about the need for us to revise our institutional plan to cover the next 5 years. As part of that effort, we will need to revisit our strategy for institutional growth and development as it's been managed since I've been Chancellor for the last 5. This will include my assessment of how the results of the recent completed North Carolina General Assembly budget session will affect the operation of the campus over the next couple of years. I'll close with a comment about football and a comment about parking. And I've put parking as the last topic because I know you'll stay around to hear that. Now first, institutional planning. For the better part of the last couple of decades, UNC Charlotte's planning cycle has been governed by the planning cycle of the UNC System General Administration. 5-year plans were developed by every campus and were regularly revised every 2 years. Our last edition of the UNC Charlotte Institutional Plan was to guide us from 2004 to 2009. With the arrival of President Erskine Bowles in 2006 and the launch of several of his initiatives, including UNC Tomorrow and the President's Advisory Committee on Efficiency and Effectiveness, the normal process for revising campus plans was abandoned. With UNC Tomorrow now complete and a presidential transition underway, this is an appropriate time for us at UNC Charlotte to revise our institutional plans. Now, earlier this year, as she mentioned, in concert with the deans and her associate provost, Dr. Lorden launched a revision of the campus academic plan, the college plans, and the plans of academic support units. I will soon ask the members of my cabinet to begin the revision of their divisional plans in support of the academic plan. We also want to use this opportunity to revise the assumptions of the planning process, restate our institutional goals as they more closely, to more closely reinforce our revised mission statement, and identify key strategies that we want to pursue over the next 5 years in a constrained economic environment. All of these elements will be fully vetted with the faculty, the staff, and the students over the course of this year-long exercise, which will end late next spring when the trustees approve a new 5-year plan that will govern us from 2011 to 2016. It would have been highly desirable for us to have begun an integrated planning process with all parts of the institution following a common set of assumptions, goals, and strategies from the beginning. And that certainly will be our model from this point forward. For those of you who remember my time here as provost, I've always prided myself on being the prince of planning. I now think sometimes I'm the king of chaos. With the many varied and growing demands on our time, I just couldn't see taking on one additional project. But it's now clear, particularly with the change in the president, that we develop a new 5-year plan. It must be an institutional priority this year, and it'll be a personal priority of mine as well. As we develop the institutional plan, we need to be particularly attentive to identifying measures that help us document the effectiveness of our academic programs and our supporting administrative services, and Dr. Lorden spoke to that need as well. Let me turn now to the topic of enrollment growth and expand a little bit upon what Joan said as it relates to the future development of UNC Charlotte and our current management of the financial challenges that we've had. I think most of you know that we've been growing quite rapidly. In fact, we expect, as Joan said, that the fall enrollments will be 25,500 or more, maybe as much as 25,600. Depends all upon what Kathy Balcom does. And Kathy and her staff have done a wonderful job on all of this. That's 800 more students that we had than at last fall at this time, and it's almost 5,000 more students than when I started as chancellor in the summer of 2005. And notably, that growth, as Dr. Lorden mentioned, has been accompanied by a significant jump in applications, particularly at the undergraduate level, virtually no change except recently in the academic characteristics of the entering class, and that's in a positive direction, increased racial and ethnic diversity, and improved retention and graduation rates. This growth has been quite intentional. Analysis by the UNC General Administration several years ago confirmed growing enrollment demand for the university in the state of North Carolina at both undergraduate and graduate levels that would reach 80,000 new students by the year 2017. That would be a 40% increase in enrollment at the University of North Carolina in the system. A subsequent analysis by a task force that I appointed and that was chaired by the provost showed that the growth of population and surrounding certain economic clusters in the Charlotte region and the counties that are adjacent to us would require a campus enrollment of 35,000 students by the year 2020 or shortly thereafter. I supported and endorsed that planning target, as did the trustees. And subsequently, we conducted a general capacity analysis and prepared a campus master plan to better understand the implications of the construction of facilities, the development of infrastructure, and the use of our available natural resources to support 35,000 students and the required number of faculty and staff. I did not then and do not now support growth for growth's sake. Rather, as the only public university in the greater Charlotte region, and in fact for better than 90 miles from Charlotte, enrollment growth has made it possible for us to develop the academic programs, research capacity, and cultural resources needed to serve this region properly. Moreover, having been approved as a doctoral research institution by the Board of Governors in the year 2000, growth has facilitated the development and expansion of our doctoral programs and our supporting academic departments, the critical mass of faculty necessary to sustain significant research activity and research programs. Continued measured growth was and is perfectly consistent with our recently revised mission statement. But once the financial recession took hold, we realized that we needed to manage our approach to growth somewhat differently. Perhaps as a result of the poor job market, perhaps as a result of our enhanced efforts to promote retention and degree completion, we began to see far more continuing students at the undergraduate level than we had before. And that necessitated a rollback in our freshman enrollment targets, as Joan described for you, and we began to move towards more transfer students and more graduate students where we had greater instructional capacity. As intended, we have successfully stemmed the growth of freshmen to the 2008 level, but the growth in the returning undergraduate student population has continued unabated. Thus, as I mentioned earlier, although we plan to grow this year by just 365 students from 24,700 last fall to 25,065 this fall, it looks like we'll be over 25,500. There is no question that this approach, when combined with required budgetary reversions and reductions, has had some significant adverse consequences for our academic programs, the support of our permanent faculty, the employment of part-time faculty, and the delivery of administrative services to serve an increasing number of students. No question about that. The silver lining is that we've continued to get enrollment increase funding from the General Assembly. In the most recent session, for instance, the one just completed, we received an additional $3.7 million for enrollment growth that we did not otherwise expect, and that was of a total of $5.5 million of enrollment increase dollars in the system entirely. By carefully managing enrollment increase dollars and not filling new faculty and administrative positions along the way that would have been created by the enrollment increases, we were able to offset a significant proportion of our required budget reversions and reductions. We've had to do much more with much less as a result, but we have been able to avoid large cuts in our pre-existing base budget that would certainly have produced large layoffs on this campus. We were facing a much more serious set of reductions this fall, but as many of you know, the General Assembly stepped in and eventually agreed to a compromise that would permit the university to raise tuition to offset most of the cuts we expected. And in our case, the tuition increase approved by the Board of Trustees offsets more than $7 million of the $7.6 million in reductions that were adopted by the General Assembly. So we've traded the tuition increases to pay off the reductions. Now, although economic circumstances during the upcoming year can change, and the governor can always take actions we do not expect and over which we have no control, we do not presently foresee the need this coming academic year for the campus to lay off any additional personnel or to require any furloughs. But next year, fiscal 12, could be far different. State budget estimates are currently projecting that the fiscal 12 state budget, which by the way begins July 1, 2011 and goes to June 30th, 2012, they're currently projecting that that budget will be short about $3 to $3.5 billion on a $19.5 billion base state budget. Some of these reductions may be avoided if the General Assembly adopts some revenue-generating measures, i.e. new taxes, or renews some existing taxes scheduled to sunset. Some action may be taken in Congress to offset Medicaid shortfalls, and some of the reductions might be offset by additional increases in tuition, although we would not like to see that if possible. Generally, though, I think the picture here I want to leave for you is that we need to begin now to prepare for possible substantial reductions in fiscal 12. We'll work closely with the Budget Council, the Faculty Academic Planning and Budget Committee, and the Staff Council to adopt and explore the strategic options that are available to us, including the use of furlough authority that was granted by the General Assembly in this last session. I think we will be well served by having a broad and inclusive discussion about whether and to what extent the option of furlough ought to be considered in fiscal 12. No one should be surprised by the time fiscal 12 rolls around if that's an option we choose to use. Another important consideration in the development of our strategic options will be that funding for new enrollment increases will be very much in question in fiscal 12, and perhaps until the state economy improves substantially. Although a provision in the proposed House budget this last year to limit UNC system growth to 1% in the next biennium was not adopted as part of the budget compromise, it does reflect the concern among many elected leaders that the state cannot afford to sustain the enrollment increases of the past. You and I would probably agree in a very short conversation that the last thing a state should do in a difficult recession is to limit access to the public university. But the political and fiscal realities cannot be ignored as we plan for the next year or two. Restrictions on enrollment increase funding could have implications for how we handle the budget crisis, but also for the approval of new academic programs by the Board of Governors. Since the completion of UNC Tomorrow, we've been very fortunate to have secured approval for the establishment of several new undergraduate and graduate programs, including a bachelor's degree in Japanese studies, the master's degree in anthropology approved last week, and master's degrees in construction and facilities management and fire protection and administration. But we have not yet received final approval on requests to establish master's degrees in health informatics and in real estate, or our doctoral program proposed for bioinformatics and computational biology. That would be our 19th doctoral program if it is approved. And similarly, although the Board of Governors has approved for planning a new PhD program in public health sciences, and that's a necessary step that we have to take if we want to, engage our long-range plan to develop a school of public health, ultimate approval will depend upon the need of available funding for additional academic programs. I sit as one of the chancellors on the Board of Governors Committee on Educational Planning, Policies, and Programs. I don't get to vote, but I can tell you this is one of the most difficult discussion areas the Board of Governors is having at the present time, how to fund new programs. As far as this current year is concerned, I have the good news that it's going to be relatively quiet, with opportunities to make some strategically important long-term investments by spending some money. I do not have the final figures yet, but I do anticipate the campus will begin this year with a very healthy balance in our unexpended reserve. We will have to hold on to most of those funds in the coming budget in anticipation of the reductions we will have to take in fiscal 12. But with that said, we do have the need to make some commitments of continuing and one-time funds to deal with academic and administrative needs that we have right now. We have serious faculty shortages in some departments and programs, and they must be filled. We must make some investments to recruit department chairs where we cannot find suitable internal candidates. The campus computing network needs replacement right now. We're in the middle of implementing electronic procurement, a project which has significant potential for long-term savings. We're well along in the restructuring and redesign of the research administration process, and we need to complete and sustain that. And with the departure of Vice Chancellor of University Relations, David Dunn, I'm deciding right now that we need to hire a full-time person whose sole job will be dedicated to strengthening our relations with state and local officials, not just in Charlotte, but across the region. And that search will be launched in the next few weeks. With the rest of our unallocated continuing funds, we have an opportunity to use a good part of them in one-time investments during the current fiscal year. I think most of you know, if you don't spend all your money by June 30th, it expires and goes back to the state. And so we have an opportunity to spend some money on a one-time basis. We know there are long lists of things we could do in our departments and our colleges and on the campus level, and we'll work with the vice chancellors and deans to identify those most important needs. That would certainly include some things we could do to strengthen campus safety. We're implementing a web redesign project, as you know from having seen the website recently, and that will require an intensified commitment of resources over the next 18 to 36 months. The more money we put at the project, the quicker it will get done. And we have a major review of the Division of University Relations and Community Affairs underway, and we'll want to make sure that the mission of that unit is sketched out completely and funded. As I told you last year, roughly 25% of our staff at UNC Charlotte have been at this institution for less than 2 years, and we have a continuing need to properly orient and train those people so that the institution can be as efficient and effective as possible. And in response to an evaluation of our training programs conducted last year by Professor Stephen Rogelberg and graduate student Heather Gordon in the Organizational Science Consulting and Research Unit, we've invested in a new staff training center that is across the street on Highway 29 in the University Foundation building that we bought last year. This is just across from the south entrance up the little hill. We'll want to commit some additional resources to the Department of Human Resources to strengthen our orientation and professional development programs for staff, and this will also be a facility that could be available for faculty training as well. The budget crisis has until recently had less of an adverse effect on our building program. As Joan mentioned, we've broken ground on the Center City building. We've made good progress in that Uptown Charlotte facility. We've also made good progress, as you can tell, when you go over to the CRI campus and see the Energy Production and Infrastructure Center, what we've been calling EPIC. Both of those facilities will be done next year sometime. We continue our design of the Portal building. It's an industry partnership and incubation facility, and our second motorsports engineering building on the CRI campus is in design and will soon start construction. And as we continue construction on the Phase 9 Residence Hall project, which is well aiming completion toward in fall 2011, we are looking forward to design and construction of Phases 10 and 11. These are new residence complexes designed to keep the proportion of on-campus enrolled undergraduates at about 22% of our undergraduate student population. A new office and locker complex for the tennis program and refurbished tennis courts will soon spring up as a result of a generous gift from trustee Dale Halton, and we should soon complete work on new natural and synthetic recreation fields over off of John Kirk Drive. If you've been on John Kirk Drive and seen that open area there, that's new fields. Notwithstanding this level of activity, we face some real difficulties ahead with respect to facilities, particularly on the academic side. Although the General Assembly authorized the allocation of $60 million in special state indebtedness for building repairs and renovations in the UNC system this next year, and that would bring $3.6 million to UNC Charlotte, no new funding at all was provided for the planning or construction of capital facilities on any campus. And that included the $4.8 million request we had in for our science building. My guess, given the economy, is that we're at least a year or two away from seeing planning money for the science building, and maybe another 5 years away after that is typically required for the design, the plan approvals by the state, and completion of construction. We've used some of our federal indirect cost money, the reimbursement money we get from the feds for the contracting of federal grants and projects, and we've used those dollars to build things like Cameron Hall, the second motorsports facility, and even Portal, but we are at the limit of what we can do from that source, absent some dramatic increase in our externally funded research output. In contrast, we can afford to build residence halls and dining halls or other specialized student life facilities like the Student Union because students pay rents, they pay dining fees, and other designated fees that guarantee payments on the bonds that are required for the construction of those kinds of facilities. So we're in a very different situation with respect to student facilities than we are our core academic facilities. We also face some issues with respect to the startup of the new facilities that are already in construction, like EPIC and like Center City. Any new building requires new funding to pay for utilities, custodial, maintenance, and information technology and security. Because of enrollment increase funding last year, we redirected about $2.2 million out of the budget of enrollment increase funding so we could open the new bioinformatics funding because the legislature had not provided any new operational funds for that building. Fortunately, the current year budget is going to pay us back that $2.2 million and some more, so we have an opportunity to fully fund the bioinformatics operation. We'll get partial year support for Center City and some other facilities. But given the expected budget crunch coming in fiscal 12, again, the year after next, and possible reluctance in the General Assembly to fully fund enrollment increase, It's far from clear that our next budget will be sufficiently robust to fully fund EPIC or Center City on a complete year basis. This is why that will be our top legislative priority going into the session next year. We have to explain to the General Assembly members that we simply have to have operating dollars to open these new facilities, because if we have to redirect dollars for operations, it will come out of monies we've held back from enrollment increase, which go to support your work in the classroom and the work of our administrative services. Let me say just a word about football, and then I'll close with a word about parking. A year ago at this time, we were struggling, really struggling, with the question of whether we'd be able to move forward with the football program on the original timetable to start in 2013. We looked at the condition of the economy. It would have easily been to justify a decision not to start, even though football doesn't take state funds to launch. But we also realized that construction prices and the interest costs on debt were at historic lows and continue to be. So on my recommendation and the trustees' approval unanimously, we went ahead. That decision was subsequently affirmed by President Bowles and by a unanimous Board of Governors in approving the student fees that were required to build the football stadium, the field house, and the practice fields. And it was endorsed by our student body leadership as well. It was, of course, as you know, affirmed by the General Assembly when they approved a large omnibus bill this last summer to authorize all kinds of construction in the university, including residence halls, student unions, parking decks, and the like, and the football stadium and field were part of that bill that was passed and signed by the governor. In case you do not know, the football stadium and the complex for football will be located on the ellipse just east of Duke Centennial Hall on the CRI campus. We do expect to break ground in mid-spring, and committees that I have appointed in consultation with the athletic director will soon begin sorting through all the logistical issues associated with football, including academic and medical support, parking, transportation, tailgating, ticket sales, and the like. So it's a good thing we have 3 years to get ready. Finally, let me spend just a second before we break up into the general faculty meeting on the topic, your favorite, certainly mine, parking. Ordinarily, I wouldn't spend any time on this, but next week is going to be really ugly. And I want you to be prepared. A drive around campus will show you that we've created a net of nearly 700 new parking spaces since last fall. We're also in active planning of 2 parking decks, Deck H across the street from Witherspoon Hall in the Residence Hall complex, and Deck I, which is a new deck that will be located behind the EPIC building on the CRI campus. Parking and Transportation Services is also negotiating with nearby student apartment complexes to try to run some students to the campus via shuttle. We've also taken the step of arranging to lease 400 additional spaces at the Starlight Movie Theater across Highway 485 on Highway 29, North Tryon Street, to be served by a shuttle service that will run every 15 minutes. You can park there for $49 a year if that meets your schedule and will work for you. And I understand there are many spots still available, although we have moved some people like campus contractors to that lot, and they'll shuttle in from that. So if you don't want to be frustrated, if you have a regular schedule, if you want to save some money, and if you like movies, with that said, there is a limit to just how much parking we can build on this campus. I think we have to realize that we have many interlocking parts in our institution. Our parking problem is not so much a parking problem because we haven't built enough parking, although many think so. We will continue to have a parking problem as long as we insist upon scheduling most of our courses between 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. on 4 days of a 5-day week. And I was hoping that the light rail project would eventually give us some relief in parking demand, but if you've been reading the papers, you know that light rail is light years away. So we need to implement some actions on our own. We'll have to continue to build parking decks to be sure, but we also have to more effectively use our instructional day and our instructional week. And I will be asking the provost and the deans and the department heads to make a much more aggressive effort and to ask your cooperation in occasionally teaching courses at times that are not right smack in the middle of the day, where we often have 100% or more capacity on campus. We're also going to work hard on trying to improve the efficiency of the shuttle system to get more people to want to ride that. The most important reason, though, to do this is that we simply will not be seeing additional academic buildings in the next, as I said, 2 to 5 to 6 years. And we're going to have to rethink how we use the day if we're going to make use of our academic space, and you are all going to have room to teach your classes. I know that's a lot to throw at you when you've had a coffee and a donut, so I think what I'll do is close now, and what we'll do is we'll reset the stage for the general meeting of the faculty. Everyone's invited to attend. This is a time for you to ask questions of me, of the provost, of the faculty president, and I've asked my cabinet to stay as well in case you have questions that we can't answer and they can. Thank you for being here. Thanks very much.